There's a reason you're seeing this commercial on TV often.
And while we make more e-commerce deliveries to homes than anyone else in the country, we never forget that your business is our business. The United States Postal Service. Priority, you.
The Trump administration is considering privatizing the post office because the Postal Service loses money, $2.7 billion net loss in the fiscal year which ended September 30. And that has prompted talk of desperate measures. Congressman Darrell Issa, who previously chaired the House Oversight Committee, says, "Personally, I do not want to see the Postal Service end Saturday delivery or see post offices closed, but the Postal Service is losing $10 billion a year and needs to find ways to cut costs." If you're confused already, he says $10 billion, the Postal Service says $2.7 billion. Think net loss. We'll come back to that in a minute. Net loss. What's the difference? Let's ask Mark Dimondstein, president of the American Postal Workers Union, and Bart Chilton, host of RT's Boom Bust and former U.S. Trading Commissioner and long-suffering congressional staffer. Welcome.
Thanks, Holland.
Question one, first brief history lesson from Bart. You worked on the Hill 15 years, 10 in the House, 5 in the Senate, so long before e-commerce and before FedEx and UPS became the formidable competitors they are today. Even then, the Postal Service was under the microscope?
Well, it was. I mean, it used to be that Congress funded this up until 1971, that there was actually a post office department, and then it became self-sustaining. It's off budget, as it were, but supposed to make money from selling stamps and delivering packages. And it's done pretty well over the years, but they had a rough go of it, as you pointed out in your opening. And so now people are looking at all sorts of ways to improve, and at the scapegoats that are out there, Amazon, and there's others too, FedEx and UPS, that President Trump has talked about, Amazon in particular. But it's been a debacle for years on the Hill because, as you point out, Congressman Issa, nobody wants to lose their local post office. Sure. That's constituents. Nobody wants to lose Saturday delivery, and people want to continue to work. Folks that deliver the mail. They do hard work, and it's important work. But it's an ongoing controversy. It's been there for decades, Holland.
The Postmaster General used to be a cabinet position.
Right.
Mark, fast forward to 2006. What many Americans may not realize is that the Postal Service gets no tax dollars for operating expenses. It sells postage. And like most businesses, it funded its retiree health care on a pay-as-you-go basis. Right. Until a lame duck Republican Congress passed the Postal Accountability and Enhancement Act of 2006. Explain how that law pushed the Postal Service into the red.
Well, that law demanded of the post office something that's demanded of no other agency and no other company. It was demanded that the post office pre-fund retiree health benefits 75 years into the future. Now, that's for workers that not only are not at the post office yet, they weren't even born yet.
Right.
That took $5.5 billion out a year because it was dictated that they had to do it within 10 years. Took $5.5 billion out of postal funds, shifted it to the federal treasury. Nobody was going to be able to sustain under that kind of absurd funding type of mandate. And they haven't been able to meet it. And actually, most of the postal losses that are being talked about and the different figures banded around, the losses, it's manufactured by this 2006 law, which, by the way, was passed bipartisan. And over 90% of the so-called losses come from that. So the fix isn't as complicated as people make it. A key part of the fix is to alleviate this absurd pre-funding mandate. By the way, it's well-funded. And the retirement plans of the post office and postal workers are well-funded. There's $50 billion in the retiree health benefit plan. Before, the post office was simply paying as they're going and meeting their obligations like most companies
Like any other business.
Any other business.
I can't imagine any line item that you'd have to fund 75 years of amortized over 10. The Internet has disrupted every business, and for the Postal Service, it's good news, bad news. Email has whacked revenue from first-class letters, and e-commerce, such as the deliveries depicted in that TV commercial we saw, are now big business. The mailman or woman is stopping by every house 6 days a week anyway, and the Postal Regulatory Commission found that special contracts like Amazon's generated $7 billion in profit for the Postal Service last year. As I said a minute ago, net loss. Bart, isn't this a win-win?
Oh, it's a win-win. I mean, from my perspective, they're already there, as you say. They're the last mile. They're not doing the whole thing. They're not, flying their own planes. And even though Amazon, as you say, is in the spotlight here because President Trump has a beef, quite frankly, it's a political beef with Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos, who owns the Washington Post. And the Washington Post, he thinks, at least the editorial board, doesn't like President Trump. So this is really not just political, it's personal for the president, it appears to me. But it's not just Amazon. It's FedEx. It's UPS. Heck, DHL is coming back into the U.S. after being gone for a dozen or so years. So it may be then. All of these are money-making for the post office. Now, could they be making more money? Maybe, and I'm totally cool with re-examining things, but what you don't want to do is cut your nose off to spite your face. This is a profit-making venture for the post office.
Well, Mark, to Bart's point, politics permeates almost all of life. How much of this push to privatize do you think is driven by FedEx, UPS et al., trying to replace the post office, if only for the reason Bart cited, the animus to the Washington Post?
Well, I think there's certainly a corporation-driven push, but I do want to point out that FedEx and UPS also need the public infrastructure of the United States Postal Service. They put, at least according to the Postal Service, FedEx and UPS puts about 25 million packages a week into the postal system because it's not profitable to go down a dirt road in rural America or some urban centers.
So they ride the last mile.
They ride the last mile, but I do think that it's deeper than a personal animus. I think there are certainly Wall Street financial interests and ideologues like the Heritage Foundation that simply don't believe in the public good at all and public service and public employees. So, we'll have to see where all this goes, because the reality is all this push around privatization may help a very few, but it will be expensive to many, including UPS and FedEx customers and those who use e-commerce. Because while the last mile is certainly part of the changing mix, letter mail's down, as you said, Holland, but e-commerce and packages are up. We have a saying in our union, the internet taketh and the internet giveth.
Right.
But 30% of e-commerce is returns, if e-commerce is going to work. So e-commerce also has to have a strong first mile to be able to process, take back the packages and process those packages back to where they came from. So it's a changing dynamic. It's an interesting time. And there's a lot of opportunity.
How much of this is union busting?
I think some of it probably is. The workers at the Postal Service are unionized. They make good living wages and decent benefits, something that all workers should have. So certainly there's an effort on the part of this administration to reduce the voice of unions and to reduce the voice of workers. That may be some of it, but I think the main thing is the post office takes in $70 billion a year in revenue. And those in the private side want to take that and turn it into a profit-making machine rather than public service.
And maybe set their own postal rates.
Well, think about it. If you don't have to go down that rural road, then maybe the only way you get there is a $20 surcharge.
Ouch. Bart, what do you see going forward from a business perspective, and how do you see postal customers impacted?
Well, that's a great example. If you have to pay a surcharge for going that last mile, that last 10 miles, or, for example, if you had to pay for forwarding your mail when you move, there's a whole host of options out there. The post office does passports, etc. The one that the Inspector General noted back in 2014 was banking services, Holland, and for one of the same reasons that the Postal Service is so important, getting to that underserved area. 7% of Americans, and these are primarily rural Americans, are unbanked, no banking whatsoever. 20% of Americans are underbanked. So if you could have banking services, people know that you can get a money order, but you can get prepaid cards. In South Korea, for example, the Postal Service will take deposits to private banks. So that is the area that the Inspector General said may have the most promise for the Postal Service, but there's other ideas that they can do now. What doesn't make sense anymore is what maybe did 25 years ago, and that's getting rid of Saturday delivery, because as we discussed at the top of this segment, they're making money. The Postal Service is making money by delivering for the other contractors on the weekends.
And now even Sundays.
Even Sunday.
Because of
Absolutely.
Amazon. Even if they don't privatize, Mark, is Saturday delivery, Saturday post office hours safe for now?
I think that there's bipartisan support, strong bipartisan support for a vibrant public postal service, including 6-day and sometimes 7-day delivery. And there's some growing support for expanded services on the financial side and in other ways. The post office often is the heartbeat of that neighborhood, the heartbeat of that community, and there's so many more things that the post office can do, should do, and we look forward to being part of that process.
They take away Saturday, and the switchboard on the Hill will explode.
That's right.
Vox Populi. Mark Dimondstein, Bart Chilton, thank you for stepping into the big picture.
Thank you, Holland.